insufficiency of income, but the adult rate of benefits should be restored to single parents under 25 on universal credit. There's a practical way for the UK Government to support. Does the Minister agree?
Mr. Speaker, I recognise the work that the Honourable Lady undertakes with the APPG on food banks. We are protecting, the Government are protecting the most vulnerable with a £94 billion support package for households, and have helped nearly 2 million people out of absolute poverty after housing costs since 2010.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My constituency of Edinburgh West is not amongst the poorest in Scotland. Well, we already have 1 in 10 children, in some areas 1 in 3 children, living in poverty. 2/3 of them, their families, are actually working. So with the soaring food prices, sky-high mortgage rates, and Edinburgh having the highest increase in annual rents in the UK, families are struggling. We know that our Scottish Government is only interested in independence. So can the Minister tell me what the UK Government is going to do for those families?
Mr. Speaker, the Government recognises the anxiety that people feel about rising mortgages. That's why the Prime Minister's priority is to halve inflation this year. That is the single best way that we can keep costs down and interest rates down for people, and we've got a clear plan to deliver that. The Chancellor also met with major mortgage lenders last week and has agreed a mortgage charter covering 75% of the market. Hopefully that will provide reassurance to mortgage holders and others affected by this.
Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I'm sure the whole House will wish to join me in paying tribute to John Angeli, OBE, the Director of the Parliamentary Broadcasting, who is leaving the House service at the end of this week. During his 12 years as Director, John not only oversaw the expansion of live video coverage to all public proceedings, but delivered the hybrid capability which enabled Parliament to function during lockdown, and of course made history with President Zelensky beamed into this chamber. He has more recently brought live subtitling and British Sign Language to our proceedings. I am sure I speak on behalf of the whole House in thanking John and wishing him all the best in the future. We now start with questions to Prime Minister. Dr. Luke Evans.
Number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, today will see the second reading of the Holocaust Memorial Bill. For decades, survivors like the late Sir Ben Helfgott showed the extraordinary courage to share their testimonies so that we would never forget. I hope the whole House will unite today to get this memorial built and put those testimonies at the heart of our democracy for generations to come. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Dr. Luke Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And for 3 years since I've been elected, I've been campaigning to improve health facilities in my community. And I'm pleased to see significant investment in Leicestershire with £14 million for a CDC in Hinckley and part of £20 billion for hospital improvements for the LRI and Glenfield. But I'm looking for a hat-trick of health in Hinckley. And what I'm looking for is a day case unit. The money is already there. It's tied up in red tape. I've raised this with the Health Secretary. Would the Prime Minister look to see what he can do? And would he come and like to open the CDC next year in Hinckley?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted that since its opening last month, the Hinckley CDC has already delivered, I believe, over 300 additional tests to the local community. My honourable friend will know that it's for the local health authorities to determine how to allocate the NHS budget in their area, but I have no doubt that he will continue to make the case for them for a day case unit in his community.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, can I join your tribute to John and wish him all the best on behalf of the House, and join the Prime Minister in his comments about the Holocaust Memorial. I'd also like to wish Muslims across the country a happy Eid. And Mr. Speaker, last week the Labour Party lost Margaret Madonna, our first female General Secretary, and a trailblazer in every sense of the word. Margaret provided guidance, leadership and loyal friendship to so many in the Labour movement. And it wasn't long after I started in this job that Margaret was at my door. And I will be forever grateful for the advice and support that she gave me. We will all miss her terribly. Mr. Speaker, his party spent thousands of pounds on adverts attacking plans to build 300,000 new homes a year. At the same time, his housing minister says it's Tory party policy to build 300,000 new homes a year. So is he for building 300,000 new homes a year or against it?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can just remind the honourable gentleman of our record since being in office. 2.2 million additional homes, Mr. Speaker. Housing starts double the number we inherited from the Labour Party. More homes meeting the decent home standards. Housing supply up 10% in the last year that we have figures for. And in the last year we had figures for, we also saw a 20-year high in the number of first-time buyers, Mr. Speaker. That's a Conservative government delivering for this country.
Mr. Speaker, it wasn't a difficult question. Can he point to a single person in housing, in construction, anywhere, who thinks he'll actually hit his target of 300,000 new homes a year? Anyone?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the record is that in the last 3 years, we've delivered almost record numbers of new home building in every one of those years. But Mr. Speaker, it talks about targets. So let's be clear. I promised to put local people in control of new housing. I delivered on that policy within weeks of becoming Prime Minister. But I am confused from the honourable gentleman because first, the Shadow Community and Housing Secretary said communities should have control. But then he then said we should get the targets back and disempower local people. I do want to give him some advice. I don't think it's local people that are the problem. It's a Labour Party policy.
Mr. Speaker, presumably if he could have identified a single person who thought he'd hit his target, he would have told us. And there you have the problem. 1 minute he says he's for building new houses, the next he's campaigning against them. And the truth is, far from delivering, since he crumbled to his backbenchers and scrapped mandatory targets, house building has collapsed. He knows it, they know it, and every expert is telling them it. Why didn't he just admit it? He's not going to get anywhere near his target, is he?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman now claims that he supports house building, especially on the green belt. But unfortunately for him, it's good that he agrees that he does believe that now. But unfortunately for him, the Shadow Deputy Prime Minister, the Shadow Minister for Women, the Shadow Health, Justice, Defence, Business, Northern Ireland and Scotland ministers are all united against more house building in their areas, Mr. Speaker. I have to say to them, though, Mr. Speaker, I would say to them, though, they don't have to worry too much because he's never actually kept a promise he's made.
Mr. Speaker, you can tell from his answer, not answering his body language, he's actually given up. He's given up. And his failure isn't just shattering the dream of those who desperately want to own their own home, it's also hitting those who already have a mortgage. Because of their economic chaos, mortgage holders will be £2,900 a year poorer. How can they ever look the British people in the eye again and claim to be the party of home ownership?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think he's noticed that his Shadow Housing Secretary doesn't actually agree with his new policy of concreting over the green belt, Mr. Speaker. She's been campaigning against developments in her own constituency. She said she wanted to prevent urban sprawl and provide green space for local people. I think that's quite sensible, but it's classic Labour, Mr. Speaker, saying one thing here, doing another thing elsewhere. You simply can't trust a word they say.
At least he isn't claiming they are the party of home ownership anymore, because we are. Mr. Speaker. She's given up. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister says he's 100% on it. But his definition of 100% on it is to gently ask the banks to do the right thing. His softly approach, refusing to put mandatory measures in place, risks leaving 1 million households without support. How many will have to lose their homes before he'll stand up for the people his party have pushed into economic misery?
Mr. Speaker, in fact, the vast majority of the mortgage market is now covered by the new mortgage charter that the Chancellor's brought in. That is delivering practical help to mortgage holders, allowing them to extend their terms, switch to interest-only mortgage, and actually saving them hundreds of pounds a month. So instead of scaring them, actually, there is now practical support in place. But it's right that he raised home ownership, Mr. Speaker. That's why we, on this side of the House, introduced a 95% mortgage guarantee scheme. It's why we introduced the first homes and shared ownership schemes to get people onto the housing ladder. And crucially, Mr. Speaker, it's why we cut stamp duty. So now what we've seen is the highest number of first-time buyers in 20 years, Mr. Speaker. That is twice the number that the Labour Party ever managed.
Mr. Speaker, it's sort of housing crisis. What crisis with this Prime Minister? He must be the only person in the country who thinks that enough houses have been built in the last 13 years. And whether it's those dreaming of getting the keys to their first home or those already with mortgages, the ambitions of families across the country have been crushed by his failing Tory government. House building at its lowest rate since the war because he can't stand up to his own party. A Tory mortgage bombshell because they crashed the economy. Millions left without support because he won't make lenders put families first. Rather than lecturing the rest of the country on holding their nerve, why doesn't he try and locate his?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as always, he hasn't actually taken the time to understand the detail of what we're doing. So, again, I'm happy to explain it again, Mr. Speaker, because it's right that we provide support for mortgage owners, which is why we improve the generosity of the support for mortgage interest scheme. It's why we've introduced a new mortgage charter, which, by the way, goes much more farther than the Labour Party policy on protecting mortgage holders does. On house building, we're proud to protect the green belt and invest millions more in developing brownfield sites. But, Mr. Speaker, the simple truth is, that's what I said I would do, and that's what we've delivered. And that is the difference between us. I deliver what I promise. He just breaks his.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Labour-run Kirklees Council's local plan is seeing hundreds of homes built on greenfield sites, but the agreed developer levies, the Section 106 agreements, which are supposedly for local infrastructure spending, seem to be disappearing into a black hole. So does the Prime Minister agree with me that agreed infrastructure levies from developers shouldn't be going into a general slush fund? They should be spent on local roads, local schools and local health services for the communities impacted by those developments.
My honourable friend raises an excellent point, and that's why the government is reforming the Section 106 payment system to ensure that new development is matched by new infrastructure, because the current system sees far too little of the developers' profits going to build new schools, hospitals or transport infrastructure. It's also too slow and plagued by uncertainties, and that particularly hampers smaller local developers. So it will be replaced by a new non-negotiable local determined infrastructure levy, which will deliver exactly what the honourable gentleman and others want to see: investment in local communities.
SNP leader Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to start by paying tribute to SNP legend Winnie Ewan and Scotland men's national team former manager Craig Brown, who both so sadly passed in recent days, and to all Muslims who are celebrating Eid Mubarak. Mr. Speaker, on Sunday, the Prime Minister patronised the public when he told them that in the face of ever-increasing mortgage bills, that they simply need to hold their nerve. What a nerve. So may I ask him, the near billionaire, when was the last time that he struggled to pay a bill?
Mr. Speaker, the reason that mortgage rates are rising is because of inflation, Mr. Speaker. That is the root cause, which is why it's absolutely the right policy to tackle halve inflation and reduce it back to target. Now, that does mean that we do have to make difficult decisions. It does mean we have to be patient while the impact of those decisions actually has an impact. But in the meantime, Mr. Speaker, as I was explaining previously, we are taking practical steps to support mortgage holders across the United Kingdom, particularly through the SMI scheme and the new mortgage charter.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, that answer confirms what we already know, that this Prime Minister is out of touch and the Tory party is soon to be out of time. And what the public really want is change. But in a week where the Conservative Party and indeed the Labour Party both refuse to accept proposals for public sector pay rises, whilst at the same time accepting the economic damage of Brexit, is it not the case that Westminster does not offer the people real change nor real hope for the future?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman just exposes the complete economic illiteracy of the SNP's position. His first question talks about the challenges posed on ordinary families by higher interest rates caused by higher inflation. What does his next question do? Support a policy that would increase government borrowing and make the situation worse. Mr. Speaker, it just demonstrates completely candidly why the SNP's approach to economic management is simply not fit for anyone in the United Kingdom.
Mr. Speaker, local police stations are a key part of communities such as Aldridge in my constituency, and that's why I continue to make the case to Labour's Police and Crime Commissioner to save and strengthen the role of Aldridge Police Station, not force it to close. So does the Prime Minister agree with me that any such closure would be reckless, and Police and Crime Commissioners should be working with local communities and local police teams to provide greater certainty, particularly given the extra 1,376 extra police officers this government has put into the West Midlands?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to hear about the extra police officers that the government has funded in my right honourable friend's community, but I am concerned to hear about the planned closure of Aldridge Police Station. I'd like to thank my right honourable friend for raising such an important issue. I know it's one on which she is championing her constituents. As she will know, unfortunately, this is a decision of the locally elected Labour Police and Crime Commissioner, and I would join her in urging them to think again.
Liz Savile-Roberts.
The Prime Minister's solution to inflation is to push families into poverty while letting corporate profits pile up. Economic illiteracy. The IMF said this week that the way to cut inflation is for companies to cut their profit margins. It's corporate greed fueling inflation, not workers' need for fair pay. Can he explain to the 1 in 5 people in Wales facing hunger because they cannot afford to buy decent food why they must pay his price for lowering inflation?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, actually, my honourable friend the Chancellor met with all the economic regulators this morning, and they'll be making an announcement later about their plans to ensure fairness of pricing and supply chain to ease the burden on consumers. But I'm glad she brought up the IMF when it comes to tackling inflation, because actually the IMF, in their words, strongly endorsed our plan to halve inflation, and they called our steps both decisive and responsible.
Jonathan Lord.
Mr. Speaker, as my right honourable friend knows, I've been liaising closely with the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities and with the Treasury with regard to the terrible news of Woking Council's recent Section 114 notice. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that in this scenario, the vulnerable must be protected and that the local councillors of all parties need to work together to try to put the council's finances back on the right track?
Prime Minister.
I know my honourable friend is a great champion for his Woking residents, and as he knows, the Secretary of State for Levelling Up has intervened in this authority and appointed commissioners to ensure that decisions are taken that provide the best outcomes for residents, including the most vulnerable and indeed the public purse. I agree with him that local councillors should be working together with the commissioners to put the council's finances in order. The commissioners will submit their first report to the Secretary of State, setting out progress on the council's path to improvement and financial sustainability, and I look forward with him to seeing further progress.
Sir Christopher Bryant.
Thank you. The Prime Minister has had responsibility for the UK economy now for 1,323 days, and he's delivered. He's delivered the largest national peacetime debt ever, the largest tax burden since the Second World War, the highest core inflation since 1991, the fastest interest rate rises since 1989, and the biggest fall in living standards in our history. So will he stop lecturing my constituents about holding their nerve, ditch the lame excuses, and admit that he is literally the worst person to be leading this country through a cost of living crisis?
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, again, what do we hear from the party opposite? Only ideas that would make the situation far worse, Mr. Speaker. It's as simple as the honourable gentleman has sat there and supported plans to borrow tens of billions of pounds more. That would make inflation worse. The honourable gentleman has sat there and said that we should not stand up to unaffordable union pay demands. That would make the situation worse. And the honourable gentleman has sat there and supported plans to not exploit our domestic sources of energy, Mr. Speaker, imperiling our energy security. Those are all things that would make not just the situation worse for British families today, but for years into the future. And that's why this Conservative government will keep doing the right thing to support them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents rely on many nearby hospitals. Milton Keynes, where this government has committed to a new women and children's hospital. Stoke Mandeville, who has just completed the build of a new children's A&E. But also Wickham, where infrastructure and maintenance issues in the ageing tower is preventing around 2,000 operations a year from going ahead. My local trust has a plan for a £200 million new clinical centre at Wickham Hospital. Will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, work with myself and Buckinghamshire colleagues to make that a reality?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. Whilst he knows that we are no longer inviting further schemes to join the new hospital programme, I can tell him that in the future, new schemes will be considered through the rolling programme of capital investment in hospital infrastructure. That will secure the building of new hospitals beyond 2030 and mean future investment to upgrade the NHS estate across the country. Now, future plans for that will obviously be set out in spending reviews and fiscal events, but in the meantime, I know that he will continue to make the passionate case for Wickham Hospital, and I join him in that.
Chris Elmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hundreds of steel workers are outside Parliament today, and some are in the gallery, calling on the Prime Minister to act now to back our vital steel industry before it is too late. So will he confirm today that he will match the ambition of the Labour Party and our international competitors to deliver competitive energy prices, invest in green steel production, use UK steel in our procurement systems, and protect us from dirty steel imports by introducing climate measures? And when will he get on with protecting and supporting the industry?
Mr. Speaker, we're proud to support the steel industry and value the contribution that it makes to this country, which is why we've put in place the energy intensive industry scheme that provides hundreds of millions of pounds of support to steel companies with their energy bills. We've also introduced the Industrial Energy Transformation Fund so that companies can apply for capital grants to help them with the transition. We are taking forward plans in the Treasury for carbon border adjustment mechanisms to ensure a level playing field. And it's why, Mr. Speaker, during the pandemic, that I stepped in to support financially a steel company in Wales.
Sir James Durbridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite 5 years of lobbying, sadly, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association International branch will leave the United Kingdom. Mr. Speaker, you know this is a great concern to the House, although perhaps something a little niche for our constituents. It is important. They need special status. The government haven't granted that by way of a short bill or an amendment to an existing bill. And could the Prime Minister at this late stage this month do something about this? Because otherwise they'll be gone, never to come back.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the United Kingdom values the work of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. My right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, has made clear that he does not want the CPA International to relocate. He's written to them in March to confirm that officials from the SCDO would work with the CPA to find a mutually acceptable solution to the status issue, and I look forward to seeing progress.
Alison McLevin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, your constituents and mine, I think, have been made a promise by the Prime Minister. Inflation at or below 5% by the end of this year. So I want to ask the Prime Minister, what will happen if he fails to meet that promise? Will it be yet more ranting on about the Labour Party, or will it be the general election my constituents crave?
No, Mr. Speaker, we are sticking to the course of bringing inflation down, Mr. Speaker. I think what the Labour Party need to understand is that requires making difficult and tough decisions, Mr. Speaker. It requires prioritising. It requires being able to say no when people come looking, asking you to borrow more money. Those are the type of responsible decisions that I will make and the Conservative government will make because they're the right ones for the country.
Let me more.
Mr. Speaker, for over 160 years, Southport Pier has been at the centre of our visitor economy, welcoming visitors from far and wide, including Chorley, Mr. Speaker. For the mismanagement of Labour-controlled Sefton Council, who've closed our pier, businesses are concerned it will have a huge impact on tourism. Will the Prime Minister condemn these actions and support my campaign and efforts to work with this Conservative government to get our pier open?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome my honourable friend's commitment to the important community assets in his constituency, such as the historic Grade 2 listed Southport Pier. And I am pleased to say that he is working and succeeded in getting the government to provide £2 million as part of the Coastal Community Fund to undertake improvements in the pier. And that's alongside the landmark £35.5 million town deal for Southport, which is the second largest town deal anywhere in the country.
Samantha Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the first opportunity that I've had to put a question to the Prime Minister for the residents of the City of Chester. So, why does the Prime Minister think it's acceptable for sewage to be pumped into the beautiful River Dee that flows through Chester for the next 27 years?
Mr. Speaker, of course it's not acceptable, and that's why this government has gone further than any other government in tackling this issue, committing to monitor 100% of storm overflows, an investment programme of £56 billion to upgrade infrastructure, and enshrining in law strict targets, as well as introducing unlimited fines for water companies. But when it came to talking about those policies in this House, the party opposite couldn't even be bothered to turn up and vote for them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Later today, Parliament will welcome apprentices from around the UK who were working in the aerospace industry. And I'm very much looking forward to meeting Callum and Brittany, who are both apprentices in my constituency of Wolverhampton North East at Collins Aerospace. Would he join me in celebrating apprenticeships in the aerospace industry and encourage colleagues to attend and meet their apprentices?
Well, can I join with my honourable friend in both celebrating everyone doing an apprentice and encourage everyone to go and meet theirs later on today and pay tribute to Callum and Brittany in particular. And she's absolutely right to highlight the importance of the aerospace industry, particularly because of our new defence cooperation agreement with Italy and Japan to build a new generation of fighter aircraft. Thousands of new jobs will be created across the country. Many of those will be through apprentices, and that's an example of this Conservative government providing opportunities for the next generation.